As I read article after article and combing the news, trying to understand what's going on, I saw this article by Zaluzhnyi first, and then comments by Tusk, and then Zelensky's statement, and then Garry Kasparov's interview, and they're all saying the same thing. Not just that Putin is evil or Putin is bad or that kind of thing, but Putin is actually trapped. And he can't really get himself out of it. I'll explain what I mean here in just a moment. But before I do, my name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Please consider subscribing if you want this kind of update. Okay, so here in the New York Post just a couple days ago, yesterday I think it was, Zaluzhnyi put out this article. And here's a summary of it, and I'm going to show you just a little bit more from the actual article itself. Peace on Russia's terms is not peace, it's capitulation, says Zaluzhnyi. That's really important to understand. Ukraine just can't do that. But Putin can't quit either. And I'll explain why he can't quit in just a moment. But Zaluzhnyi goes on and explains how the Russians do what they do in their propaganda. And so this was instructive. And then I'll get to the bigger point in just a moment. Zaluzhnyi writes that every encounter with Russian representatives follows a predictable pattern. First, they flood the table with lies and irrelevant details, forcing their counterparts to spend hours correcting falsehoods. They do this intentionally. This is their modus operandi. Then they invoke moral relativism, accusing their opponents of the very things that they themselves are doing: colonialism, hypocrisy, double standards. This is that mirroring effect that I've talked about before, right? Finally, they present aggression as a reaction, occupation as protection, genocide as self-defense. So they lie and twist and invert it. But the article was really interesting because after that, as self-defense, it says it's a cynical inversion of the values calculated to paralyze democratic societies. They know what they're doing here. They understand how we in the West think, and so they're trying to paralyze us by like making us have to answer back. Understanding this method is vital not only for Ukrainian diplomats, but for all who engage Moscow. Negotiating with Russia, where are we? Negotiating with Russia is not a conversation, it's a contest of will. The Russians test endurance, exploit empathy, and interpret every gesture of goodwill as weakness. The only language the Kremlin respects is consistently is backed by power. That's right. You have to back it with power. Now, the reason that I'm showing you this, and let me go back to this first, a little bit more on the subject of ending the war. Zaluzhnyi emphasized the need to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity, hold Russia accountable for war crimes, and secure guarantees. Anything less would be betrayal, not only of Ukrainians, but of the principles that safeguard the security and freedom of the world. That's exactly right. But what's going on? What's behind all this? Well, Zelensky gave us a little bit of an insight. Putin is at an impasse when it comes to real successes on the battlefield. The situation looks more like a stalemate for him. Why? Because for us, it's very hard, but we're at home defending what's ours. That's right. The enemy's in front of you, and your wives and children are behind you. That's a good day. Now he needs to show that he dominates. He wants to find some operations he can present as successes to his society. That's why he's so focused on Покровsk. Now, Sean Pinner put this out yesterday, and I showed it yesterday, but it's worth showing again. If you look at what's purple, held or regained by Ukraine, and what's in red is controlled by Russia, and what's in red stripes is where Russia is advancing. Okay, so purple, look at all this ground that Ukraine took back, right? And around Kherson and up here in Kharkiv. And then if you look at what Russia has actually accomplished in the last couple of years, it's very meager. Like, look at this, just these little areas on the cusp of Luhansk, and some in Donetsk, and some down here in Donetsk, and some in Zaporizhia, and a little bit in Kherson. Like, they haven't taken much back at all. So Putin really does have very little to show for it. Now, if you couple that with this, then here, this is Garry Kasparov talking about Putin's thinking, how Putin's thinking. Now, there's a summary statement, and then we're going to see a little bit of his quote, and it'll sound a little bit redundant, but let's listen. Garry Kasparov nails it. Putin isn't some rational leader. He's a dictator obsessed with staying in power for 25 years and counting. This war, it's his life support, infecting every part of Russia. Forget ideology. It's not like ideologically motivated. He is a one-man mafia boss. And honestly, for my money, that's one of the best ways to understand how Putin operates. All analogies are imperfect, but thinking of him as a mafia don makes a lot of sense of why he's doing what he's doing and why his followers do what they do. Desperate to project strength, he won't stop until he declares victory, which he can't get. That's really the problem. He's not been able to actually have the successes that he has here. Okay, so he'll just keep expanding the war. He literally couldn't care less about how many Russians die as long as he controls Moscow and St. Petersburg. Okay, Trump even offered him an out twice, and Putin rejected it because it would make him look weak, and weakness means the whole flock turning on him. Like Trump tried to give him an off-ramp, and he wouldn't take it. He's even eyeing a test of NATO's Article 5 and hoping that his far-right buddies will take over Europe, that NATO Article 5 will be invoked, and then it will fall apart because his pals in NATO won't, his few pals will not support it. And then it'll show to be a paper tiger. The West's slow reaction and constant reliance on America has just emboldened him. He's emboldened because we didn't actually do what we said we were going to do. Okay, so here's the actual interview where Kasparov is answering a question. He says, I hate to start to talk with criticism, but this time I have to point out that your question is basically repeated the same mistake in evaluation because you tried to analyze Putin's actions from the position of the responsible national leader. Like we're thinking of him as a rational actor. And what if he's not? What if he's something other? Everything you said is absolutely correct. Vladimir Putin's rule is devastating for Russia, and I believe it will end in the collapse of the Russian Empire, which is long overdue. That is a possibility. But Vladimir Putin's calculations are not based on this rational thinking. His view is very different. He's in power for 25 years and counting. That's all that matters to him. He's a dictator, and he works for one thing, only survival. Okay, so now James Buchanan, the Nobel Prize winning economist, has told us he won the Nobel Prize for showing like politicians, all they really are after is staying in power. And he's talking about democratically elected politicians in the West. How much more? A dictator. He's a dictator and he works for one thing, only survival. He's still there, and the war has become the only way to keep him in power. Now, if his calculation is that if I continue this war, I stay in power, or if I stop the war, bad things could happen to me and I could end up like Gaddafi, where they were like, I don't even know how to explain in polite ways what they did to Gaddafi. Just look that up. You'll see. War is in every layer of Russian society, from the very top of the government to industries all the way down to kindergartens. It's infected by the war virus, and that's how Putin stays in power. Right, he has to, otherwise he loses his power, and he won't do that. Look at Soviet leaders based on the political momentum. Just obviously Soviet leaders that we remember, you and me, like Brezhnev, they had different calculations. But also, don't forget that Soviet leaders after Stalin, they were ruling a country that had strong ideology and a communist party. I'm not here to advocate for the Communist Party or for any kind of ideology, but there's a fundamental difference between the party rule, which is a mafia structure, and the one-man dictatorship, right? Like it's party power was very different, like ideologically driven. They had a North Star as opposed to just whatever Putin says or thinks. And the system depends on his survival, demonstrating his strengths is to be a macho, to be an alpha surrounded by other mafia bosses. And that's why, his current position today is, you may call it desperate, but I don't think that he sees it the same way. He will continue the war as long as he has the resources. And this is something that the free world is just getting to understand. Putin is desperate, but he doesn't think he is. It's weird, but he's really backed into a corner where he can't do other. He's constrained in certain ways, but he doesn't process it that way. That's what Garry Kasparov is saying here in this video. Okay. And then we'll couple that with Prime Minister Tusk, whose conclusions just was this today, yesterday, today. Today is November 10th, 2025. Poland Prime Minister Tusk says that there are no objective reasons why Ukraine should lose the war. Like, think about that. Russia outnumbers them vastly, but they're supported. Ukraine is supported by NATO arming them and providing both money and ammunition. And okay, in an interview with Gazeta Wyborcza, he warned that Ukraine's defeat would drastically worsen Poland's security and stressed the need to build a stronger partnership with a sovereign Ukraine. Yeah, no objective reason that they should lose the war. Ukraine's actually in a much better position than we think about. And Putin is actually much more locked down in his position than he even understands. And that's where we are today. It's really interesting. Okay, tell me what you thought about what you saw here. I'm curious about your thoughts. I think that Putin is really in a bind and he can't really escape it. He can't stop the war. He's going to keep going forward, but it's going to devastate him and his economy. All right. Tell me what you thought about that. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.